طلبتنا الأعزاء السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. I'm going to talk today about first lecture of physiology for the second year about cardiovascular system. I'm going to talk about the blood vessels, blood pressure, the resistance of the vessels, and the blood flow inside the vessels. And also I will cover the lymphatic flow or lymphatic system. Okay. For the second slide, we are going to talk about the function of the blood. Definition of the function is delivery of nutrition and oxygen to the tissue, and also removal of the waste product, metabolic wastes. The greater the presence of difference between 2 points, the greater the flow. So when there are difference in the pressure between 2 points inside the vessel, so there is a blood flow. The blood pressure is the force of the heart exerted by the blood on the wall from the inside out wall. So normal value for young adult is usually 120 over 75 millimeter mercury. Measuring, usually we measure it at the brachial artery and cubital fossa with the instrument, the sphygmomanometer, which is the manual one used by the mercury substance. So the close approximation of pressure at exit of left ventricle, systolic pressure, peak arterial blood pressure taken during ventricular contraction. So the peak pressure usually taken from the ventricular contraction, which I mean usually the left ventricle. The systolic pressure is that when the heart at rest, the minimal arterial blood pressure. Still there is a pressure when the heart at rest, but still there is a pressure inside the arteries, and these arteries still there is a pressure that maintain pushing of blood to the tissue. So it's taken during ventricular relaxation, which is called diastolic blood pressure, arterial diastolic blood pressure, between heart beat. So, but there is a definition for the pulse pressure, which is the difference between the systolic and diastolic blood pressure. The blood pressure tend to rise with age. So your blood pressure is different from my blood pressure. Usually when I getting age, any people getting age, the normal blood pressure is a little bit increase for the systolic and diastolic to maintain nutrition to the tissue. And also due to the residency or the elasticity of the artery tend to decrease. So what we call it atherosclerosis, which means that there is a deposition of fatty sclerosis of the blood vessel. So the blood vessel will lose its ability to close, or what you call it, constrict and relax according to the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. This is a process of build up lipid deposit inside the artery, and we call it, as I said, atherosclerosis. Here is the hypertension, what we mean by hypertension, and this hypertension means weakening arteries and cause aneurysm, promote atherosclerosis. So the hypertension increase the blood pressure, which makes some problem to the heart. First of all, it can cause heart failure. Hypertension is the opposite to the hypertension, which means that there is an arterial decrease in the blood pressure. So it's usually chronic low resting blood pressure caused by loose blood, usually sometime when there is an injury, internal injury or external injury, when the person lose certain amount of not significant amount, so there will be hypertension. And also dehydration, most of the cases due to dehydration, especially in summer, and anemia. When there is anemia also, sometimes the blood pressure decrease. So it's determined by the cardiac output, the blood volume, and the resistance. This is related to the blood pressure, the flow, okay, of the blood, and the blood volume regulated mainly. So this is the important point, is that the blood volume is usually regulated by what? By the kidney. This is related to the renin-angiotensin system. There is a hormonal secretion from the kidney related to the, what do you call it, angiotensin converting enzyme. Okay, angiotensin system. For peripheral resistance, the opposition to flow is that there is usually a resistance to the blood by the wall of the vessel away from the heart. Resistance hinge on three variables. So the resistance usually related to three variables: the blood viscosity, when there is increased viscosity, the resistance increase, the length of the vessel, when the length is long, usually the resistance decrease in the, what do you call it, the away or the remote distance. And the radius of the vessel, when the vessel is large, I mean the lumen is large or not. The vasoreflex also change in vessel radius, such as I said, the constriction or the, what you call it, dilatation of the blood vessel by the smooth muscles inside the vessel wall. They call it tonic media. These smooth muscle contract to cause constriction, and relax to cause vasodilatation, allowing the blood pressure to expand. Okay, so the blood vessel markedly affect the blood velocity. Laminar flow, what we mean by laminar flow, that means that the flow of the blood in layers, usually in the center, the flow is higher or larger or quicker than near the wall. The farther liquid travel through the tube, as I said before, the more cumulative friction which is encounter pressure and flow. So the flow decline with distance. When there is a remote artery, the flow is usually decrease. We are still talking about the blood pressure and blood resistance. So when there is for the peripheral resistance from the aorta until the capillaries, the blood velocity decreases when there is a remote artery. When the distance increases, the speed decreases for three reasons: greater distance, more friction to reduce speed; smaller radius, I mean the diameter is small, especially in arterioles and capillaries, offer more resistance, so decrease the flow decreases, so the remote is decrease the flow. Farther from the heart, as I said, the distance means the number of vessels and their total cross sectional area become greater and greater. Okay, from capillaries to vena cava, when the blood return from capillaries to the venules and to the veins, the velocity increase again. So from the low, and then the velocity increase until reach the vena cava and the right atrium, and then to the right ventricle, and then through the pulmonary veins to the lung. Since veins are larger, they create less resistance than the capillaries. So the resistance in capillaries more than in the large veins. Large amount of blood force into the smaller channels. Blood in veins never regain velocity. If had in a large arteries, veins are more complex. They stretch more than arteries. So the stretching for the vein are more than the arteries. We are talking about the control of the blood resistance, the blood pressure. How to control, usually either local or hormonal, or, local, whether it is local control by reflex, or usually it is neural control. So for the local control, a term called auto-regulation, the ability of the tissue to regulate their own blood flow. Usually the tissue will get some chemical substance to regulate the blood flow locally. Metabolic theory of autoregulation, so the metabolic substance in the tissue are directed to control the blood flow. If tissue is inadequately perfused, when there is less blood, waste accumulate, this accumulate, stimulate the blood vessel to dilate. And so there is an increase in the blood flow, or what they call it perfusion. Plus stream deliver oxygen and remove metabolites. Metabolic, I mean waste product. When waste are removed, vessel construct. So according to when there is waste product, there is vasodilatation, so that it will take away the waste product. Vasoreactive chemicals, there are local chemicals that can dilate or constrict the vessels, or usually by platelets or endothelial cells inside the arterioles or the capillaries, and perivascular tissue to stimulate vasomotor response. So the response is usually local by histamine, bradykinin, and prostaglandin. These are stimulate the vasodilatation, so there will be more waste excretion. And endothelial cell also secrete prostacyclin and nitric oxide also, which dilate the vessels. There is what you call a reactive hyperemia locally. The tissue become red, which means hyperemia, so that there will be the blood supply increase. Okay, so usually at the beginning there will be decreased blood supply that they call it cut off, and then there will be restore, so there will be reactive hyperemia. The flow increase above normal. So angiogenesis also can occur, which means that there is more blood create inside this area. So when there is swelling or there will be redness, it's an hyperemia. Growth the angiogenesis means the growing of local small blood vessels inside the tissue, so more blood supply. So when there is damage or there is injury, they would call it angiogenesis. Even some people, their heart, when there is heart attack, myocardial infarction, there might be some sort of what you call it angiogenesis. So the dead area will be covered by blood supply. Okay, so in regrowth of the uterine lining around the coronary arteries, as I said before, and when we exercise muscle also there will be vasodilatation and sometimes angiogenesis. And at malignant tumor, when there is a malignant tumor, there will be significant amount of angiogenesis, so that more blood form inside this area. This is controlled by several growth factors and inhibitors. So after local control, we are talking about neural control. When I talk about neural control, usually I talk about the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So there will be vasomotor center at medulla oblongata, which control the sympathetic over the vessels and stimulate vessel to contract and relax. Okay, this is there. So there are other reflexes or receptors in what do you call it in the carotid artery, baroreceptor or baroreflexes, and chemoreflexes, that reflexes due to chemical substance that excreted locally. Medullary ischemic reflex, when there is an ischemia to the medullary area of medullary oblongata or medullary locally. and the medulla oblongata from the brainstem. And as I said, the baroreceptor is automatic negative feedback response to change in the blood supply, usually in the carotid artery. So increased blood pressure detected by carotid sinus. Carotid sinus in the neck, it is usually in the carotid artery. I'm not sure whether it is external or internal. I think it's in the internal carotid artery, most likely. The glosopharyngeal nerve sends signals to the brainstem, result in inhibition of the sympathetic, cardiac, and vasomotor neurons, and also this result in excitation of the vagal fibers, vagal nerve, that slow heart rate and thus reduce blood pressure. So the blood pressure is usually by inhibition the sympathetic, and also stimulation the vagus nerve that innervate the heart to decrease the heart rate. And you may one day you will remember what they call it vasovagal attack, when there is a shock or trauma to the psychological trauma. Maybe there will be overstimulation of the vagal nerve that cause the heart to stop. Still we are talking about the blood pressure. The baroreceptor I talk, and chemoreflexes also here, an automatic response to change the blood chemistry. I already talked, and these chemoreceptors are very sensitive to the CO2 and oxygen. Okay, so when there is an increased CO2, there will be vasodilatation, so there will be more oxygen to the tissue. Okay, the chemoreceptor called aortic bodies and carotid bodies, located in the aortic arch and also subclavian artery, external carotid artery, external, not internal. The third slide when I talk. So it's in the external carotid artery. Okay, I already talked about medulla oblongata. You should talk about it, which is related to the blood perfusion when increased organ, and also the cardiac and vasomotor center, as I said, related to the sympathetic. Okay, so other brain center can affect vasomotor also. Stress, anger, arousal can also affect the blood pressure. Medullary ischemic reflex, the slide before I talk about it. Okay, cardiac and vasomotor center send sympathetic signals to heart and blood vessel. Already we talk about this, but here in details. You should read it carefully, and when you have some question, I'm ready to talk about it. So there are two purposes of vasoreflexes. So what you call it, rerouting blood for perfusion. So these vasoreflexes allow blood to perfuse locally to certain area that demand blood. Okay, it's usually centrally or locally. I talk about centrally from the medulla oblongata and locally from chemoreceptor and neuron stimulation by sympathetic usually, or other parasympathetic. Okay, usually mostly parasympathetic that cause vasodilatation. So it's regulated by the kidney also, as I said before. Okay, and it depends on the demand. When there is physical exercise, the blood vessels in the skeletal muscle will be dilated so that more blood will flow. Metabolite accumulation also, it is a good chemoreceptor for vasodilatation. Okay. So specific artery constrict according to the tissue that needs, and the pressure maybe sometimes downstream drops when the artery is removed, the blood pressure decrease. Okay, so for example, when there is vigorous exercise, as I said before, arteries can be dilated and the heart pump rapidly. There will be tachycardia. Okay, and the muscle also contract so that it will push the venous blood to the heart. Vasoconstriction also occur in kidney and digestive tract, so that the blood deviate from these organs to the muscles. There is physical exercise. Dosing also in armchair after big meal. Okay, so when you got big meal, especially after breakfast, after futur, you will feel that drowsy. What you call it is drowsy. Dosing here should be drowsy, and this drowsiness is due to pulling of blood from the brain to the digestive tract through the vessels that they are the mesenteric vessels, the superior and inferior mesenteric, usually the superior at the beginning after the meal. Vasoconstriction in the lower limbs when there is a big meal, okay, raises the blood pressure above the limbs. So redirecting, what they call it, redirection of blood according to the tissue demand. Here is the intestinal arteries. As I said, the mesenteric arteries, usually the superior mesenteric artery, which is directly get blood from the aorta, the abdominal aorta, to the upper intestinal. Hormonal control, I talked to you about the vasoactive substance that is secreted from certain area. And here is, as I said before, the kidney, they call it angiotensin 2. Okay? And there are also serotonin and other substances that are related even to the minerals, such as promote sodium and water retention by kidney when there is decreased blood pressure. So more water and more sodium chloride. For the slide number 5, we are still talking about the causes of dilatation and constriction. The general control from the heart, from the brain, and also routing blood from one body region to the another. This is two reasons. Trial natriuretic peptide. This is increase urinary sodium excretion, reduce blood volume. Okay, so vasodilatation and lower blood pressure, epinephrine and norepinephrine effect also. Okay, the most important blood in the body is in the capillaries. So the capillaries are the site for tissue nutrition and what do you call it, exchange area for oxygen and CO2. So through capillary wall exchange made between them, and you already know about this, which is affected by the waste product, the carbon dioxide, CO2, minerals, and amino acid, lipids, glucose, and oxygen, and also the water. These are all affect the capillary exchange according to the what you call it, the concentration of this substance. Capillary exchange, chemical passes through the capillary wall, through the endothelial cell, cytoplasm. Intracellular cleft, there are clefts in the endothelial wall, and this is for the histology, I think you already know about. Filtration pores in the endothelial system. These pores, they call it fenestration, that the substance pass through it, through the capillaries. Mechanism involve diffusion, transcytosis, filtration, and reabsorption. So at the end, when the substances are needed, there will be again reabsorption of this substance. Diffusion, usually from high concentration to low concentration. Transcytosis, it means that the whole cell can transport from one area to another. And also filtration, there are pores between these so that the substance can filter through between the intracellular and extracellular area. Okay? And water soluble, there are lipid soluble water and there are water soluble substances. Usually the blood wall is usually polysaccharide, so it is a lipid substance. So the substances that are soluble, lipid soluble, are move easily than the water soluble. This is the water soluble is usually glucose, and large mass such as protein held back. So when there are larger particles can't move sometimes. Water soluble such as steroid, oxygen, hormone, oxygen, and CO2 diffuse easily through plasma membrane because they are lipid soluble. I already talked briefly about transcytosis. Okay, so the membrane there are certain cells like endothelial cells pick up materials, large material that can transport or transfer from through the membrane by what you call it pinocytosis. Okay, and filtration, fluid filter out of the artery and capillaries and through what you call it osmolatry. So osmotically re-enter at the venous and deliver materials. The blood hydrostatic pressure drive fluid out of the capillary because of the hydrostatic pressure. Hydrostatic pressure, physical force exerted against a surface by liquid blood pressure in vessel in hydrostatic pressure. Capillary reabsorb about 85% of the fluid they filter. So it's filter, and then most of the significant amount of this the fluid can reabsorb. Variation in capillaries, filtration and reabsorption. This is also a process related to the capillaries that reabsorb most of the fluid, as I said, 85%. Alveolar capillaries in lung absorb completely to keep fluid out of the air. So when there is fluid in the alveolar capillaries inside the lung at the site of alveoli, that means the gas exchange, so there will be usually no fluid because it is completely reabsorbed. Okay? Okay. So I'm going to talk about edema. Edema, there are two, either we call it EDEMA or OED. It's different for English or American spelling. So edema, fluid accumulation inside the tissue, intracellular or extracellular. So tissue faster than it is absorbed. So there will be accumulation because there is no tissue can accumulate fluid because there is a defect in the reabsorption, excretion of the fluid. There are many reasons for but the causes usually there are three causes. The first one usually sometimes relate to the kidney. So increased capillary filtration. When there is more filtration through the capillaries, that means more fluid accumulation. Kidney failure, histamine release due to, for example, when there is allergy at certain area, the histamine release so cause fluid accumulation. Old age, when someone is 70 or 65, or like my age, usually there will be what you call the accumulation of fluid according to the gravity. So there will be a swelling of legs, the legs, the foot, the shin area. Usually when you look to someone who's old age, you will see that there is a swelling or pitting edema due to many causes. One of them that the heart start to be decreased in its function. So capillary absorption decrease. Hypoproteinemia, when there is a patient has low level of protein inside the blood, what they call it a term called hypoproteinemia, due to, for example, liver disease, or there is kidney problem, or he's in malnutrition, there is a problem inside the GI tract, so he will get decreased the protein. Usually when it's hypoprotein, usually the albumin is less than normal. Usually it should be more than 3 or 4 gram per liter, so it decreases. Obstruction lymphatic drainage, I will talk about lymphatic surgical removal of lymph nodes. it causes lymphatic obstruction, and it may reach to the what you call it elephantiasis, because the leg become very very big. Okay, oxygen delivery and waste removal impaired, especially in kidney failure. Okay. For the slide number 7, we are still talking about edema, and now talking about slightly talk about pulmonary edema. So it can cause suffocation. So the patient has dyspnea, he can't take a breath normally because pulmonary edema. I mean, there is a fluid inside the alveoli. There is another term called cerebral edema, when the fluid inside the brain tissue increase than normal, which can cause increased intracranial pressure sometimes, which can cause headache, and the patient get vomiting, start preceded by nausea, and when there is a big cerebral edema due, for example, injury or due to abnormal some metabolic waste product, the patient got fit. Fit means seizure, الصرع, due to, or sometimes we call it convulsion, and this convulsion may be progress into coma. When there is coma, means loss of consciousness. Severe edema in or circulatory shock, when some people get shock. One of the shocks is circulatory shock due to excessive fluid in tissue space, causing low blood volume and low blood pressure. Mechanism of venous return, how the vein return to the blood, is related to the flow of blood from the tissue to the heart, to the right side of the heart, relies on the difference between the pressure. They call it the pressure gradient between the capillary and the venules, and the gravity also affect this process of return of blood to the heart, so that it will pump to the lung and then go to the left side of the heart to be distributed throughout the body tissue. Skeletal muscle pump, and this picture, this photo, give you an idea how the muscles can squeeze the veins or venous blood through the veins. So when there is contraction, it will pump it against the gravity to the heart. What they call it, muscle pump, because there is near the muscle pump there are valves inside the veins. When these valves are disrupted or affected or damaged, there is what we call it varicose vein, الدوالي بالرجلين. Okay, which means like dilatation of venous blood vessels more than normal. Okay, and also there is a mechanism called cardiac suction pressure. So when the card push, so there is a section of blood from the vena cava. Blood pressure is the most important force in a venous return. So blood pressure, gravity also affect. Okay, for the limb, contraction muscle, I said, thoracic respiratory pump. Okay, when we get deep breath, there will be suction of the blood. Okay, by what you call it, by expiration and inspiration, because there will be a negative pressure inside the chest. Okay, inhalation, thoracic cavity expand and thoracic. This is, I said, they call it inhalation when we breathe and expel air from the lung. They call it expiration and inspiration. Abdominal pressure increase, also forcing blood upwards. So there is contraction muscle and relaxation of the muscles. Venous return and physical activity, as I talked before. Okay, so venous pulling will be push against the gravity above, from the leg above to the abdomen and then to the chest, to the heart. Circulatory shock, there is what you call it what you call a term called circulatory shock. So a shock due to less blood inside the vessels, inside the heart. There are many types of shock. One of them is circulatory, the other is a neurogenic shock, and there are other shock. Okay, so in my mind now it's a circulatory and a neural shock. Okay, this is something very normal to be seen in emergency department. And there are cardiac shock when there is a myocardial infarction, heart attack, and when there is low venous return, they call it low VR. Cardiac output is low because too little blood in returning to the heart. So the heart can't pump blood because there is less blood coming to the heart. Okay? 3 principles for the circulatory shocks. Okay? Hypovolemic shock, this is another type. Obstruction venous return shock, when there is the blood can't go to there. For example, during DVT, when the DVT, deep venous thrombosis, especially when it is in the pelvis, when there are big venous vessel obstructed, there will be also decrease the blood and can reach to the shock. Venous pooling, when the blood in the legs, when standing or sitting. Okay. Neurogenic, as I said, neurogenic shock is related to the nervous stimulation by usually vagus nerve or so-called vasodilatation. It causes endothelial shock to brainstem injury, septic. There is another shock, septic shock, or bacterial shock also, and anaphylactic. Bacterial shock from its name, when there is bacteremia, septicemia, the bacteria inside the blood can cause shock, decrease blood pressure. Anaphylactic shock from its name, that when there is allergy, when there is secretion, a large amount of secretion of histamine and other hormone that cause the blood vessel to be pulled, to be dilated, so there will be decreased blood pressure. When there is circulatory shock, how the body responds, how to compensate for this decreased blood pressure, we call it shock. So there is what we call it homeostatic mechanism. So to cause compensation, and there will be recovery from the shock. Falls to horizontal position. When there is shock, when someone start to get hypotension, and so he will fall down on the ground, so there will be the blood can pull to the brain. So this is one mechanism, is fall to a horizontal position, gravity restore blood flow to the brain. Exercise increase venous return in many ways, heartbeat faster and harder, and increasing CO2 and blood pressure. Vessel of skeletal muscle, as I said before, and also increase respiratory rate, I said before. Okay, so we are talking about the microcirculation and the lymphatic system. As I said, the arteriole divide into smaller vessel called meta-arteriole. So the small arteries, very small artery, they call it arterioles. It becomes smaller to be called meta-arterioles, and then from meta-arteriole it divided into capillaries. So the capillary is the site of the exchange. Okay, so from both the arteriole and meta, so the capillary arise from, so on, through capillaries, they call it. The opening of the flow of the true capillaries are surrounded by minute smooth muscle called precapillary sphincter. So there is a sphincter even in the true capillaries. Okay, so these are usually capillaries made of single layer. This is a histology. You will read about them and see how these one layer capillary basement membrane, and how the cells can react to this, and the fluid, how nutrition and also minerals can go, and the smooth muscle, how the contractile contract. They call it contractile muscle or contractile cells. So capillaries are divided into three main types: continuous capillaries, muscle and the brain. Okay, it has slit pores between the cells which permit passage of molecules. Fenestrating capillaries, this is another one. This is which means that there is pores, okay, in the kidney. In this type, the cytoplasm of endothelial cell itself is interrupted, forming gaps called fenestration that are closed by the thin membrane. Sinusoidal capillaries, okay, this is another type. The capillaries which are called sinusoidal from its name. There is sinus, synod, it's large, have very wide lumen, so it's sinus like buhaira, like lake, okay, that are extremely porous because of the endothelium is discontinuous. There are large gaps between the endothelial cells, okay. These are the three types, okay, continuous and the fenestration and sinusoidal, okay. These pictures, three pictures, give you an idea about the cells for the capillaries and the arterioles, how the cell is the one layer and how the pores are forming, and also the structure of the microcirculation between the arteries and venules, okay. So look at it, and it are really very careful and let us say obvious to be seen, and also the nucleus of the endothelial cell are also. So these are types of capillaries on the right side, and this is a portion of the wall for the left side, and below is the structure of the microcirculation. Now we are talking about the slide number 10. We are still through the capillary permeability or transport of the fluid across the wall of the capillaries. Okay, the mechanism, usually there are four mechanisms. First of all, diffusion, when there is concentration the solute between the two sides through the wall, and it depends the substance, waste product, and the substance is such as water and other substances, glucose, urea, sodium, and others can transport through diffusion from the concentration from one to the other. Okay, so that you only through the slit pores and fenestrate. That means there is an opening, and there is diffusion are inversely العكس depends the proportionate, that means to their molecular size. Okay, so the substance diffuses from area of high concentration to area of low concentration. This is the diffusion. Okay, through the balls wall at the cytoplasm of the capillary endothelium wall. Okay, so the oxygen and CO2 can also diffuse through this diffusion due to difference in concentration. Filtration, also the fluid, also the fluid contains soluble substance that can force through the pores due to difference in the hydrostatic pressure. So the filtration depends on the hydrostatic pressure between the two sides of the one layer of the capillary. Okay, so amount of fluid per unit time is proportional to the difference in the pressure and capillary surface area, and also the permeability of the capillary. Transcytosis, this is can transport large molecules can transport through the wall by transcytosis. Diapedesis means the whole cell, such as white PC, leukocyte can transport through the wall. Okay, how the interstitial fluid format and how this fluid is drained to the capillary so that it will go away and decrease the area of edema. Space between these the cells, they call interstitial tissue or interstitial space. Usually it contains collagen, thick fibers, and filaments, and also there are hyaluronic acid, the matrix, and protein, okay, and fluid also. So the interstitial fluid is formed continuously and drained by the capillaries, and it is consists almost the same constituent of the plasma. I mean, interstitial fluid is the same concentration of the plasma. The factor that affect tissue fluid formation and drainage, they call it the Starling forces, okay? And also this force, in addition to the force, the capillary permeability also is a factor that affect tissue fluid formation. The force that called Starling force, this is one of these forces is hydrostatic capillary pressure, okay, from the fluid outwards. So hydrostatic capillary pressure force the fluid to go out, okay. Another force is the interstitial fluid pressure when this fluid contains substance, so that push fluid inward to the capillary membrane. The plasma colloid sorry. The third force is related to the albumin. When there is an albumin in a large amount of albumin, so the osmotic pressure, they call it colloid osmotic pressure, that increase, so it affects the permeability. It brought mainly by the plasma albumin. Okay, the average is usually 25 millimeter per curie, so it is a good pressure inside the veins. So it force fluid inside through the capillary membrane inwards, okay. For the slide number 11, we are still in the intercellular pressure, or intracapillary pressure, so the fluid can filtrate from inside and outside. We are still for the fluid to be favored fluid reabsorption into the capillaries or outer the capillaries. So there are difference in the filtration or difference in the pressure. So the balance is balance of the Starling pressure and also the capillary permeability. Okay, so you could read these, the difference between the pressure in, we call it intercellular pressure or inside the capillary pressure, and there are difference in the millimeter per curie. It was proved that the interstitial fluid pressure IFP is negative in certain areas, for example subcutaneous tissue. So the favor fluid filtration rather than reabsorption. Okay, this is a figure that gives you an idea. We are talking now about the lymph circulation. Circulation, which is present due to excess tissue fluid. So it can take the fluid that are more than usual, or these fluid that can't taken by the venules, by the veins to the heart, so that the lymphatic tissue can take this fluid, okay, and this fluid is not reabsorbed for certain reason from the capillary to the blood. So the fluid through the lymphatic fluid can go, okay. So it's the similar for the what they call it, the isotonic pressure. It is the colorless, transparent fluid having pH of 7.4. It contains less protein and calcium and has higher ratio between albumin and globulin. Okay, and the lymphatic circulate in certain area and usually non-innervated for these lymph vessels has no nerve supply. Okay, and also lymphatic capillaries and increase and they become vessel, and these will go upward with the venules until it reach to the chest wall, okay, and these vessels then become larger and which drain into what you call a thoracic lymphatic duct, okay, thoracic and right lymph duct. This can be seen anatomically inside the thoracic cage near the vertebral column to the right side of the vertebral, and then go to the heart. Sorry, go to the big vessels. Okay, subclavian veins. Okay, so when there is accumulation of lymphatic fluid, it also can cause edema. This fluid accumulating tissue which either intra or extra capillary cellular, the same like edema. Okay, intracellular edema. This is a non-pitting edema. When the fluid inside the cell, usually the edema is non-pitting, which means non-pitting. That means when we press on the tissue, it will not leave what you call it, a depression. Okay, a dent. When we leave our finger, when we press on the tissue, usually after we remove our finger, it will return to the usual position. But in edema, it will still, there is, they call it pitting edema, dent. So depression of the cellular membrane metabolic activity, usually due to ischemia or due to lack of oxygen. Okay. Inflammation, this increase the cell membrane permeability. Inflammation, I talked about it before. In slide number 12, we are still in pitting edema. As I said before, this can be finger, when we put the pressure, there will be a dipping or pit, except when there is a chronic lymph edema. Excessive leakage of fluid from the capillary. There are two reasons for this. Okay, and when the body affected by gravity, and this has two main causes when there is affection of the gravity on the fluid accumulation. Excessive leakage of fluid from capillary to the interstitial tissue. This is one cause. They produce an increased fluid filtration or decrease fluid reabsorption. Okay, this is a cause. An increase in the capillary hydrostatic pressure, also this is a cause. The third cause is decreased protein, usually albumin, hypoproteinemia, as I said before. Okay, occur due to either decrease in synthesis of plasma protein or excretion from a kidney, excess amount of plasma protein, especially by kidney failure or nephrotic syndrome. Or there are certain diseases that cause the kidney to be secrete albumin, so there will be albuminemia, hypoproteinemia. Also, permeability of the capillary also increase filtration due to many causes, and the protein also is a cause. Okay, excessive retention of salt in the body, when the sodium, and so especially the sodium is a factor, important factor in the production of renal and cardiac edema. Inadequate lymph drainage, as I talked before, the drainage when there is a blockage of the drain of the fluid for many reasons that can even cause elephantiasis and cause pitting edema. Okay, safety factor against production of edema. I think usually the protein level is very important, but there are three factors that prevent occurrence of edema. Low compliance of the subcutaneous interstitial. The following three factors prevent occurrence of edema. Okay, low compliance of the subcutaneous interstitial. We call low compliance, that means it does not allow the fluid to be accumulated. So it is late compliance. So it press the fluid from the interstitial tissue to the capillaries, to the venules, and then it will go. The negative interstitial fluid, hydrostatic pressure. This can cause the fluid to go away. Okay. The second factor, increasing the lymph flow. Lymph flow can increase many times until 50 times when fluid begin to accumulate in the tissue space. Thus, remove large amount. So there is more compliance, more accessibility that the lymph flow can increase several times so that there will be no fluid. This is another good mechanism. The third mechanism is what we call it push down of interstitial fluid protein. So the protein will not stay when there is no protein. So the fluid will also go away. The increased lymph flow often results in reduction of the protein concentration. Okay, this is an important third factor. Okay, so the efficiency of the three safety factors, these are estimated by finding how much that can the average capillary hydrostatic pressure increase above normal before edema can occur. Okay, normally it is about 17 millimeter per curie. These are the safety factors. Blood flow. So this is an important subject that we are talking about. So how to regulate the blood flow inside the vessels to the tissue. Okay, so physiologically maintained by adjusting the diameter of the, as I said before, the diameter of the arteriole can be dilated, can be constrained according to the demand. This is one very important that can be regulated by nervous or local. Okay, so there is short-term regulation. They call it short-term. This mechanism adjusts the minute to minute flow to the organs according to the need, metabolic need. This is small. They call it minute to minute. Okay, short-term. Metabolic autoregulation and P. This mechanism can cause A, metabolic autoregulation, and B, nervous regulation. This, and also there is the third one, which is they call it humoral regulation and myogenic regulation. Okay, you could read about the humoral and myogenic regulation related to the local area. Metabolic autoregulation according to the substance that present or not present. So we can talk about this metabolic autoregulation due to, for example, when there is decreased oxygen in the area, they call it hypoxemia. So there will be vasodilatation due to hypoxia. So there will be more blood go to the area. Okay, B, vasodilatation metabolite, high metabolic that hypoxia produces a number of vasodilated. So the hypoxia can cause a number of vasodilated metabolites, which include, I will go to the number 14. The second one, I talk about the first one. The second one, due to the effect can be, I mean the factors can be affected or can affect the hypoxemia or affect the tissue or the fluid accumulation, is the adenosine diphosphate and adenosine monophosphate metabolites, which are produced by the hydrolysis of adenosine triphosphate. CO2 and also hydrogen ions also can affect the muscle, the vascular supply, and the smooth muscle and relax. Okay, so contraction and relaxation. The CO2 is a very powerful dilator of the vessels when there is an increase. CO2, lactic acid also, potassium also, okay, can affect. From A, B, and then we talk about the C, the endothelium produce several molecules. Endothelium also can share as a factor that produce molecules which promote muscle relaxation, so there will be vasodilatation. So this is a local factor. Okay, and there are factors like what they call it, endothelial derived relaxing factor also affect the area, so can cause vasodilatation through the endothelium. Okay, nervous regulation, here it is, nervous regulation. all blood except the capillaries are innervated. So the capillaries are not innervated. Usually is affected by local area substance or also substance that coming with the blood. Okay. Activation of the parasympathetic due to what they call it nervous regulation, and also sympathetic that can stimulate vasoconstriction. Okay, the sympathetic can cause so stimulate the sympathetic vasodilator, the vasodilator system dilate the skeletal muscle, so the opposite. Okay, activation of parasympathetic vasodilator. Okay, so there will be, for example, when there is certain substance. Here is the salivary gland also affected by the parasympathetic. Stimulation of the sympathetic vasodilatation, dilator system, dilate the skeletal muscle vessel. So increase the blood flow in the skeletal muscle, so there will be more contraction or more activity, more physical activity. Stimulation of sympathetic cholinergic nerve supply for the sweaty gland. So there will be more fluid excretion by sweating. So there will be regulation of the temperature also. Inhalation of the inhibition of the basal sympathetic vasoconstrictor tone. So there will be inhibition for the tone. So there will be vasodilatation. Okay. Humoral, as I said before, the humoral regulation. This is a vasoactive substance. Okay, it releases from the tissue into the blood and tissue fluid. For example, these are humoral regulation is serotonin and histamine. Okay, serotonin vasoconstriction, while the histamine is vasodilator. Okay, so in small doses, histamine dilate the arterioles, but in large doses, it dilate all the vessels. Okay. This is very. We already talked about histamine and serotonin. We are talking about prostaglandin. This is a substance that can affect the fluid and arteries. Okay, so there will be constriction, prostaglandin, especially prostaglandin E, that dilate the vessels. Bradykinin. This is a very strong from isthmium bradykinin vasodilator substance. Okay, and it can affect the prekallikrein, and this is prekallikrein can become kallikrein, which is an active substance. So bradykinin is now believed to be a mediator of vasodilatation. Bradykinin. Okay. When we are talking about autoregulation, and we are we talk about autoregulation for the substance, and we are talk about the myogenic autoregulation. So construction of the pressure increases and dilation when it decreases. So I mean what you call it, this is a constriction. By constriction, when the pressure increases, the vessel, when there is a pressure, high pressure inside the vessel will be become constricted, and it is dilated when the pressure is decreased. This is called myogenic. It depends on the fluid, passage of the fluid, velocity of the fluid, and so the velocity will depend on the pressure. When there is an increase in pressure, there will be vasodilatation. When the decrease, when the blood pressure increase, there will be vasoconstriction, and vice versa. Okay, this is a phenomenon which is found in certain organs, especially the kidney, skeletal muscles, the brain also, and the mesenteric for the upper GI tract. Okay, mechanism of my regulation is when the blood pressure increase, distension of the arteriole and stretch of the swell. Okay, so when there is increase in pressure, there will be distension of the arteriole. Intrinsic myogenic contraction from its name, contraction, that the vessel will be contract, called vasoconstriction. Okay, the opposite reaction occur when the blood pressure fall. When the blood pressure fall, it enables an organ like the kidney to maintain almost certain blood flow, and arteries the blood pressure range should be range between 80 and 160 millimeter in the brain. So it changes in systemic arterial pressure, which can be compensated by appropriate response of vascular smooth muscle. So there is a decrease in, when there is a decrease in the arterial pressure, cause cerebral vessel to dilate. Okay, sorry, when there is a decrease, not decrease in the arterial pressure inside the brain, the vessel usually dilates, so there will be more blood go to the brain tissue. So this is the adequate rate of blood flow can be maintained despite the decrease of pressure. Especially this is can when there is pressure, blood pressure decrease. Okay, so the blood pressure cause the cerebral vessel to constrict, so that the finer vessel downstream are protected from the elevated pressure. Okay, long-term complication. You remember when we talk about short-term, this is long-term regulation. This mechanism can adjust the basal blood flow over long period of time. So this is long-term regulation. Okay, and this is what you call the basal, the maintenance of the blood pressure, which usually range from 50 to 250 mercury. Three mechanisms are involved in long-term regulation. The opening of the closed collateral, formation of new vessels, and narrowing or closure of some vessels. These are three factors or mechanisms that affect long-term regulation. Long-term, that means there is an opening of new arteries or new collateral, they call it collaterals, between the two sides of the arteries, they call it arterial collateral circulation. Okay, in a process called angiogenesis. Also, formation of new vessels, this is what you call it angiogenesis, and also narrowing or closure of some vessels, so that we are, so there is what you call it regulation for long term. Opening of closed collateral, these are arteries that can be blocked, and a new vessel can occur, which can bypass the fluid, the blood. When there is a block of artery, there will be a bypass opening of arteries, so that the tissue will be not necrotic, become necrotic. There will be no dead tissue. This is what we call it collateral circulation. That means new blood vessels form due to blockage of old fluid. Okay, this is very important in the heart, in the myocardial infarction, when there is a blockage of the coronary artery, certain branch of coronary artery, so there will be bypass. If there is no bypass, patient may undergo operation to form for him what they call it bypass surgery, coronary bypass surgery. Already I talked about angiogenesis due to hypoxia. Okay, so when there is a hypoxia, there will be angiogenesis, a new blood vessel formation. In slide number 16, we are talking about the opposite of hypoxia, which is hyperoxia. It means an increased oxygen higher than normal, so there will be also mechanism for the tissue metabolism, elevate the local oxygen level. Okay, so the blood vessel constrict. Okay, if hyperoxia lasts for long time, so there will be change in structure for the vascular wall, leading to permanent narrowing of the vascular. So the hyperoxia is not a good if it is long term. And I think you remember when there is in diving. Okay, when there is long duration of diving, it will affect. So, and also for long duration, it can cause atherosclerosis. Okay, I talk about number A, regulation, and now regulation of the blood flow. This regulation of blood flow either by autonomic nervous system, sympathetic, parasympathetic, okay, and endocrine system, angiotensin 2 in the kidney, okay, so stimulate the vascular smooth muscle to produce generalized vasoconstriction. Antidiuretic hormone also, and this is angiotensin there is a drug which is work on the kidney. They call it angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor, which is a good drug to decrease the blood pressure. So that affect the kidney to decrease the angiotensin. There will be so decrease in blood pressure. So it decreases vasoconstriction. Okay. Regulation by the sympathetic nervous system, which can cause vasoconstriction. And there is a norepinephrine. This is a hormone that are secreted from the suprarenal gland that affect the vessel to produce vasoconstriction of the arteriole in the viscera and the skin. So when there is constriction for the viscera, I mean the abdomen and the skin, so more blood go to the heart and the for example, for the muscles, so that the muscle can contract and the heart can pump. This is a special duration when there is an exercise. Okay? They call it adrenergic sympathetic fibers. Epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay? This is especially, as I said, a physical exercise. They call it fight or flight reaction. So either you can fight for someone, or you could flight. So this is what we call it. The epinephrine, norepinephrine can secrete it too much, so there will be shifting of blood from the skin and viscera to the muscles, especially the lower limbs and the brain. Okay, this is the mechanism of flight or flight. Is regulation due to what we call sympathetic overaction. The parasympathetic is the opposite. Usually the arteriole can dilate. Cholinergic always promote vasodilatation. Cholinergic, okay? The parasympathetic. Vasodilatation. Parasympathetic can also decrease the heart rate, okay? And the blood vessels can also dilate. Okay, but it's limited to the digestive system, external genitalia, and salivary gland. Because of this limited distribution, the parasympathetic nerve is less important than the sympathetic. Okay, for the blood, it's very important for the sympathetic. Type of blood flow. I already talked about the laminar blood flow. So the blood flow inside the artery, it goes, it moves by laminar area, I mean layers by layers. In the center, the flow is higher, I mean the speed is higher than near the wall. This is the mechanism. Okay, they call it laminar. Okay. We are in slide number 17. Because of the laminar flow of the blood, we can't hear the blood flow unless there will be turbulence. يعني شلون اقول لك اياها، مطبه يصير، فبالمطبه مال الماء راح يصير صوت. شلون من يجي مي من شلال ويضغط على مكان اخر يطلع صوت، او turbulence من انت تكون بالطياره ويصير turbulence فالاير يتغير السبيد مالته. اوكي، this is called turbulent flow. Okay, when there is angle between vessel and vessel. So normally no sound usually, unless there will be what you call a turbulence. Turbulence, this is a disturbed blood flow. When there is disturbed blood flow, we can hear it by stethoscope. But when there is no terminal, when there is what you call it, the blood flow in layers, okay, laminar, there is no sound. Okay, this is the mechanism. Method for measuring blood flow rate. There are many methods actually, but the most important is the ultrasound. They call it Doppler ultrasound. It can measure the flow inside the vessels. It give you an idea whether the flow is okay, and also give you an idea when there is blockage, when there is what we call it deep vein thrombosis. Okay, so there is a plethysmography recording change in the volume of the organ after occlusion as venous drainage. Okay, plethysmography is a tube inside. When the blood flow after occlusion, there will be change in the volume. Okay, this should be seen practically. Okay, and you can read it through YouTube to see how the plethysmography can work to record the flow. This is usually, it is not practically. Usually the practical is by the ultrasound. Okay, there is a what you call it, a principle called fixed principle also, and the plasma clearance determination of renal blood flow. Okay, the plasma clearance. Measurement of blood flow through the blood vessel. These are the, okay, through the organs. I talk about these three, the plethysmography and the fixed and the plasma clearance through the organs. But when we are talking about the blood vessels, we usually talk about the electromagnetic flow meter, okay, through magnetic field, and this magnetic field can detect the flow of the fluid, usually the blood. And also the Doppler, and you heard about the Doppler ultrasound. The crystal give waves, and these wave signals can affected by the movement of the fluid, and it reflects the number of the red blood cells. So when there are large number of red blood cells, it means that there is large number of blood flow in this area. Okay, so it affected when there is vasodilatation in organ, might be however significant decrease in the total peripheral resistance. Okay, and this is the number 17. On slide number 18, we are talking about the blood flow in the endothelium, and we are still talking about the blood flow. And here is the tunica internal. It is a layer inside the blood vessels, and this endothelium produce number of paracrine regulating. Paracrine, there are local hormones that regulate itself, the tissue. So certain substance that regulate itself tissue, okay, and cause the smooth muscle of the tunica media to either relax or contract. So there is a local regulation. Okay, this is the whole mechanism of a process. Okay, and that can promote smooth muscle relaxation. There are certain molecules, or one of them is nitric oxide, or bradykinin. I already talked about bradykinin, prostaglandin, that can affect affecting the smooth muscle of the endothelium for the blood vessel to relax or constrict. And the endothelium, they call endothelium derived relaxation factor. These are factors that either earlier research had done. Worry about the research for vasodilatation response to nerve stimulation, about the effect of the nitrous oxide. We still on the endothelium of the arterioles, and also contain enzymes, endothelial nitric oxide synthase, which produce nitric oxide. This an enzyme can produce nitric oxide, and nitric oxide also affect the blood vessel. Okay, which from arginine. The NO nitrous oxide diffuse into the smooth muscle cell of the tonic media of arterioles and activate the enzyme. Okay, and this convert GTP into cyclic GMP. Okay, and pyrophosphate. This is something related to the metabolic or the biochemistry. Okay, because monophosphates serve as a second messenger that through the variety of mechanisms act to lower the cytoplasmic count. This is not very important for you to know about the mechanism of endothelium for the nitrous oxide aliphatic. You already know about it. In response to acetylcholine, okay, in the nerve, in the axon, the production of nitrox may be increased also. Okay, so acetylcholine stimulate the opening of calcium channel into the cell membrane. Calcium then bind to and activate calmodulin. Okay, this is not so demand and difficult to remember. Okay, activation about the endothelium, what will affect the paracrine and regulator for the vessels to be constrict or relaxed. And I already talk about the regulation, local regulation, we call it intrinsic. Okay, inside the organ, regulate the vascular resistance and the blood flow. Intrinsic mechanisms are classified as myogenic or metabolic. Some organs inside the organ, like brain and kidney, in particular, utilize the intrinsic mechanism, while other utilize the other mechanism. Okay. The myogenic control mechanism, as I said before, we talk about it for short video. If the blood pressure inside the artery and the flow in organ are inadequate, so the organ there will be less fluid to the organ, so there will be stimulation of organ. Okay. Because it is affected by the less blood, so there will be excessive high blood pressure also can also be dangerous when there is high pressure, particularly in the brain. Okay, changes in the systemic blood pressure are compensated for in the brain. We already talked about this. Okay, we are talking about the mechanism of metabolic control. We already said about local vasodilatation. Okay, and when there is a decrease in oxygen, there will be vasodilatation. So decrease oxygen, increase metabolic rate of the heart and also metabolic rate of the tissue. Sorry, the heart rate and also the metabolic rate. This is one when there is decrease. There will be increased carbon dioxide concentration. Okay, when there is an increase, also it will promote vasodilatation when there is carbon dioxide CO2 concentration. More decreased tissue pH when there is the pH become decreased. That means the pH become less than 0.7. When there is accumulation of the carbon dioxide or lactic acid and other metabolic waste product. Number 4, the release of adenosine or potassium from the tissue cell through these chemical changes. Vasodilatation in response to tissue metabolism can be demonstrated by constricting the blood supply. Okay, so there will be constriction of blood vessels. Okay, short time and also can be also long time. The constriction allow metabolic product to accumulate by preventing venous damage of the area. Venous damage of the area. When the constriction is removed and the blood flow resumes, the metabolic product that have been accumulated cause vasodilatation, so there will be excretion of waste product. We already talked about this, but this is in details about the blood flow. Okay, we talk about laminar blood flow. This is the normal smooth streamline, we call it. Okay, and these are details how the laminar flow in layers and it flow. So there it is soundless, and this is turbulence. Turbulent flow, this is the blood flow. We didn't talk about what we mean by turbulent blood flow. We just said turbulent. So this is turbulence of disturbed blood flow in a form of eddies, or what you call it in the form of angles in various directions. It produces sound, brute or murmur, which can be heard by the stethoscope, especially when in the heart, when there is a valve damage, we can hear murmur. The murmur means there is abnormal heart sound. It can be heard in certain area of a blood vessel, but it is actually not clinically practical unless there is what you call it arteriovenous shunt or fistula. When there is renal failure, when there is dialysis, usually we produce a connection between artery and vein at rest. So there will be the blood can be heard even from your ear, and you hear easily the turbulence of the blood, okay, between the artery and the veins. Method of measuring blood pressure, flow rate through the blood vessels. There are two methods that are used. So we will move to the last. So there are two methods, okay, to measure the blood regulation. Electromagnetic flow meter, the ultrasound, measuring of the blood flow, as I said before, but here is in details. For electromagnetic, the blood flow between the two poles of magnetic generate an electromotive force, EMF, in the blood, because the red blood cell can be affected by the magnetic field, and the number of these cells when are large, that means there is more blood flow. So the flow is proportionate يعتمد على النمber of red blood cell can pass through the vessel, so that we can know that the flow of the blood is high or not. Another mechanism is the what you call it Doppler ultrasound, which can measure the flow of the fluid, which is usually the blood through the vessel, whether they are arteries or they are veins. We usually send patient for Doppler ultrasound when we expect deep vein thrombosis, or when we expect that there is occlusion of arteries due to atherosclerosis, and especially when there is a disease called Berger disease in heavy smoker, when the arteries in the leg can be occluded. So this method process depends on the crystal emit, that means crystal impulse of a crystal تنبعث هاي الكريستال بالجهاز زين وتسوي waves, and these waves pass through the blood vessel, through the leg, and the sound wave, that these are the waves, we call it the crystal wave or sound wave, hit the red blood cell inside. So, and the number of these red blood cells that pass through the artery reflect the blood flow. Okay, so but are different, different slower frequency. So because red are moving away from the crystal, the amount of the wavelength of the reflected waves are picked up by the crystal, and the data are computed. So computer can be measure these waves of crystals, what you call it, it's usually sound waves, which reflect, as I said, reflect the number of red blood cells that pass through the film. And this number, when they are high, it means there is a flow of fluid. When there is very low, it means there is less flow of blood through this vessels. And thank you very much.